I speak as someone from the north and someone from one of the towns that will have a shiny new station in there. The project's great news for me. But yeah, I think it could be really, really good news for the sector if we are able to show that we can stick the landing on one of these larger projects.
And it's easy just to see it as a rail project and transportation. There's gonna be some huge positive good news stories at the end of this. It's gonna generate jobs, like you said, it'll improve housing, it'll generate business into the area. It's a multiplier effect really for me, these types of things, when it's not just that singular focus on mega project HS2 from A to B, job done.
Peter, I know we were talking off mic then, but I like 2026. It's plenty of good news for us to get into so far. What do you think?
Well, I think you bang right. It just feels a bit it feels a bit icky to me that we're not having to look for a positive spin on these things right at this moment in time. And I think subconsciously that as anyone that's seeing the visual here, watching on video, I think subconsciously we're kind of bringing our minds together and adding that positivity to the industry. And because of that, one, we're getting more positive news stories, but two, we're kind of in sync in our clothes here. Like there's a good pattern emerging.
That's a good spot. In my defense, I will say when your room is this garish, you kind of have to find some muted tones to bring it down because it does get a bit too much. But yeah, it's true. I mean, we're only a couple of weeks in, but I have to say the numbers are looking good.
Mhm.
The sort of, I guess the vibe, as I keep hearing sort of people refer to it as, feels good as well. It's yeah, let's see if we can turn this momentum into a good year. I think the sector's due on, it's fair to say, but yeah, for us selfishly, there's plenty to be getting stuck into, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. There is absolutely. So, with that in mind, seamless as ever, let's get stuck into it.
Yeah, well, I
With
guess we're kind of picking up where we left off, aren't we, to a certain extent?
mm,
Obviously, last week was a publication of the ONS data, and we spoke about. I mentioned Vibe there. The strange thing that's gone on in sector, the sentiment and how people are feeling versus what the numbers say. And for those that didn't listen last week, obviously shame on you first of all.
shame on you.
But you'll have missed a positive quarter four update from the ONS where we'd finally turned a corner on growth. And it's the turn of Glenigan this week with their
Mm,
Q4 data, which absolutely reaffirms that is exactly what's happened. And what's positive as well is a very, very similar story. That the data sets look to be, if not identical on a percentage basis, certainly the shape of them on the various sort of parts of the sector all look to be moving in line with each other. So um, residential down, albeit it's a modest decrease of
mhm.
2% over the quarter, with a 14% increase for non-resi, with office and industrial described as flying within the report, and that in total makes for a 7% growth in the sector across the quarter, which again, to that point, I know we've kind of half said it in jest on how much easier it is to find positive stories for this podcast this year. But again, well, the contrast is how hard we found it at points at the back end of last year, and actually, the sector was quietly performing better than we and other sort of
Mm.
commentators seem to think it was. I don't know what you make of that.
There was two things that sort of stood out for me on this one, and the first one is where you're seeing that growth, particularly moving into 26, and data centers seems to be
Mm.
the buzzword at the moment, which is you got to see it as a positive sign. There's a slight skepticism there in terms of bubble bursting at some point in the future around that, but let's deal with that in 2030 or yeah, let's leave it for a long time in the future. But that was the first one is data centers and the fact that these big industrial units are being built. But one of the interesting things was the offices and more offices being built,
Yeah,
which if you'd have said to me, "Where is this growth gonna come?" It certainly wouldn't have been offices. Again, slight skepticism in terms of from what I've seen in not just our industry, because we wouldn't be building offices just for the built environment, but across the board in multiple industries, I haven't got that vibe of people going back to the office, so to speak. So it's interesting where this growth is coming from, but long may it continue.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I was going to say there's coverage of the Glenigan figures all over trade press. We picked it up in specification, because the reason that I say that is that there's some additional commentary in there from the consultants line site where absolutely offices are mentioned. And I'm with you for what it's worth. There's been a lot of talk sort of post pandemic on, let's call it the WeWork model, or the casual sort of office
Mm,
model. I think my anecdotally, my guess is if there's growth in the sector, it would be in that part of it rather than the traditional,
yeah.
as you say, sort of, back to business as usual kind of a lease. Working in Manchester city centre, that's certainly the way that it seems. There's a lot of that type of premises.
Mm,
But on the data centre thing, not to provide a fly in the ointment, because yeah, it's highlighted as the single biggest opportunity. But one of the slight words of caution there is something that we spoke about last week and several points before, is just the demand at the minute. As AI, and there's the magic buzzword as we mention it every week, but we talk about it, it's so resource intense, and the pace of demand on server space and everything else that powers that as an industry is so enormous that yeah, incredibly labor intensive, incredibly
yeah.
materials intensive. The pace with which people want things built, we'll talk about it a little bit later on. There's a positive impact there that it's going to force the sector into some elements of modernization to keep pace. Um, but yeah, that demand is going to be really up there, and we've got a job to do from a labour point of view, materials point of view, and everything else to service that demand while it exists. And please God, as you say, there isn't a bubble, and if there is, that it's got a little while to go before it bursts, and we can we can build out the sector well enough to be able to meet that demand.
Yeah, I think we're safely in that bubble for many years to come. And not to spoil the third and final headline in any way, shape, or form, because we'll cover that in a little while. But it feels to me as if there's huge changes going on in our industry at the moment with and this backs to a number of stories we've covered in the way we do things, the materials we use, the processes, the technology. And we could be coming to a point in time where all that starts to flourish from what these numbers and figures are pointing towards. And I, I see it as a positive that it's not house building, although that's a good barometer. It's not just house building that is showing this increase. It's other areas of the industry, which is fantastic because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket on these types of things, and we're certainly not doing that here.
No, I completely agree with you. I think if this is a recovery, then you want it to be well rounded rather than pinned on any
Mhm.
one kind of, if I call it micro sector or sort of part of the
Yeah.
sector. But that said, a further part of the Glenigan report, obviously, it is looking into 26. We've spoken before about particularly the infrastructure pipeline and the sheer volume
Mhm.
of sort of money that's in there. But with the realization that a lot of these bigger infrastructure projects, and you ran a piece a little while back on super projects, that they're years, sometimes decades in the making before you see that money make its way through the system. So they pulled that scope a little bit further in to look at the value of the top 100 projects in the UK for the coming year. 39 billion, that pipeline,
Mhm.
that in terms of immediately available capital within that pipeline, which is really encouraging. But it places it into interesting context. We've talked before about, I think it was Barber's figures on 725 billion of project value. So only 39 realized this year, which tells you how slow and how incrementally it will be to realize that value in the system. Um, but yeah, civils of 28 billion of that, which is unsurprising. So to your point on the non-resi side of things needing to recover as well, yeah, we absolutely need to make sure that civils pipeline is, pardon the pun, is being delivered against, because
Yeah.
there's some enormous things in there.
Mm.
The Lower Thames project, the tunneling on that at 10.2 billion. So that's where the money is. Obviously, we need the housing stock, as we discussed in last week's episode, for for societal reasons and for individual case reasons. But yeah, the big money that we're going to pump into the economy and that we're going to sort of release as value into the economy comes from that side of things. So yeah, let's see what happens there.
A lot of big projects in Northern Ireland as well.
Mm.
That's something that features quite highly, particularly on infrastructure as well, which is it's nice to see a mention away from London. Really, to be fair, although there are projects in the northwest and other areas of the UK, England, sorry. Yeah, it's great to see Northern Ireland up there and getting that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we know we've spoken about it enough times. And in fact, it probably leads us nicely onto our second item today, doesn't it? But we know the power that these kind of big projects have to unlock value within a region. We spoke at a much smaller level about the Blackpool projects a couple of weeks
Hmm.
back now in terms of that local framework for highways and so on. But Northern Powerhouse Rail is somewhat surprised me actually is back on the agenda quite early. I know. Again, we spoke a few weeks back about Richard Tice from Reform being pretty blunt about, if they are to get into Parliament, then don't bother tendering for any of this work because it won't see the light of day. But the current government of the day being pretty bullish on
Mm.
finding some money from somewhere to yeah, hopefully get things moving. I think I saw 45 million, pardon me, 45 billion
Yep.
mentioned. Obviously, to my earlier point, that's not all going to be realised year one. It'll be much smaller than that. But yeah, we probably need a bit of a slower pace. Really, really interesting article in New Civil Engineer this week on sharing the news that this funding has been unlocked and what it might mean for the sector and so on. But very, very aware of the fact that we've had a high profile project of a similar nature in HS2 that didn't deliver as promised, had lots of negative attention on it from a national point of view, and that yeah, we were probably as well learning some lessons from that before we move forward with this one.
Yeah, it's quite a long, detailed article with a lot of uh, people getting involved in it, and quite a lot of sound bites. But those sound bites are in a very similar tone to
Mhm.
each other, and essentially, it's what you were just saying there. This is great news. It's fantastic investment. We need better infrastructure from a rail perspective in the north, particularly cross country, and then in the east with Newcastle and Hull and those areas. Um, but let's learn lessons from what hasn't worked in the past. And the whole sentiment of this whole article, it very much seems, I'm not going to say obvious, but let's not do what we did before and let's actually project manage something correctly. That seems to be the tone, and it should go without saying. But I think it needs to be said in this instance, particularly with what's happened with HS2. And if you're going to take any positivity from HS2 and that end result, is this is very much seen as helping to build off the back of HS2 and support it. And that means they're looking at it from a wider perspective and the whole rail infrastructure rather than just this one singular project going up the backbone of Britain or England. Yeah, it's positivity for rail.
Yeah, I think so. I was going to say, just as a complete anecdotal point, I was at an event last year where the head of HR or sort of personnel director from HS2 Limited was there, sort of talking about the good things they've done with their central employment model. I know there's been all kinds of negative headlines that I wouldn't want to get into now on sort of some of the outsourced companies that they've been using from a labour provision point of view on site. But some of the back office function and kind of the central functions they built out using local workforce, the diversity of staff they've been able to employ as a result of that and focusing on local
Mm,
communities. Um, there's some really, really good stuff that just doesn't see the light of day. So I think that there's lessons to learn from the negative things and what hasn't been delivered or cost overruns and time over. Of course, we absolutely need to learn from those things, but yeah, I'm certain there's some positive things as well that need to be looked at and incorporated. We touched on it previously, but this idea of reference class forecasting and looking at projects within your category in order to get a better, more accurate forecast going forward. We've had some really successful projects in this country that take it away from rail, perhaps, but I'm thinking that the Heathrow terminal, sort of a decade back, the Queen's terminal, a phenomenally, phenomenally successful project in terms of being on time and broadly on budget. Lots of different contractors all brought together under one umbrella with a kind of clear sense of mission.
mm,
I think if there's any lessons for me that, yeah, it's slightly broader than rail, but I would argue it still lives within our world in terms of large scale sort of civils and infrastructure projects. You could do a lot worse, I think, than learn some lessons from that because that was phenomenally successful.
mm.
But the big thing, and I'm saying this with a marketing hat on, I don't know whether you'd agree with this or not, but one of the big lessons that I would dearly, dearly love all of those to be involved is it's kind of failing on this point already. Manage the narrative.
Yeah.
Kind of think about the marketing element of this and Again, we keep talking about labor and supply and our ability to attract and retain talent and so on.
Mm,
If delivered well and communicated well, and people in the community served by this and beyond understand the value that's being created and so on, this could be a really, really positive thing for the sector, as a kind of a flag to plant to say, here's what we are capable of delivering when we work together, when we learn the lessons from the past, and when we're focused on an overarching mission that we all subscribe to.
mhm,
I've said it before. That's one of the saddest things about HS2 for me is the amount of goodwill that project had and sort of cross-party political consensus and backing from a funding point of view and everything else, and then to not stick the landing is
mm.
I think that's one of the saddest parts of that legacy is the way that it will stick in the public's mind as proof positive that the construction sector can't deliver in this country. Why can other nations have high-speed rail and we're unable to? Why can this country deliver this many large projects and we're unable to? So yeah, I speak as someone from the north and someone from one of the towns that will have a shiny new station in there. The project's great news for me. But yeah, I think it could be really, really good news for the sector if we are able to show that, yeah, we can stick the landing on one of these larger projects.
And it's easy just to see it as a rail project and transportation and what that brings. But if you look at certain pockets in isolation, there's gonna be some huge positive good news stories at the end of this. With just a quick quote from, Chris Reed, who's Rotherham Council leader, and this just puts it into context about looking away just from the actual rail part of it. For the last 40 years, Rotherham has been off the mainline rail network. Our plan isn't just to put that right, but to maximise the opportunities that it presents. Direct connection into the tram train network with thousands of jobs created and facilitating further high quality local housing. Yeah, so this isn't just an individual thing that is about commuting or transporting. It's going to generate jobs, like you said. It'll improve housing. It'll generate business into the area. If it's easier to get, not just Rotherham, but if it's easier to get into these places, that commute is extended, which means your supply of people is extended, which means talent is heightened, and it's just it's a multiplier effect really for me, these types of things, when it's not just that singular focus on mega project HS2 from A to B, job done, 20 minutes, which is always the 26 minutes or whatever it was, which is always the snippet that's going to stay with them, unfortunately, for HS2. Don't do that. Don't say it's going to deliver this one thing. Deliver multiple hundreds of things across these towns and cities and local areas, and that's where you get people really involved in it from all walks of life.
Completely, it's message control, isn't it? I know,
Yeah.
yeah, people won't want to pull this back to marketing, but I think ultimately it's, and I would say this always have a vested interest, but it's hugely important in this case. It's when we talk about the value being added by these things, it's not just what has a pound sign in front of it. If you've got a positive story in that respect, then absolutely do it. But what else is being created around that? As you say, it's these things are expensive. You can't get away from that. They can be disruptive for people, particularly those living near, where the line or any other associated infrastructure works will be. So sell them the dream, sell them the positive, and I think it's a really, really exciting thing. I think the article is incredibly timely, and I hope the necessary people sort of read it and heed the lessons laid out within there.
So let's move on to our final story, which kind of contradicts how we started this episode. So this is again an interesting piece in building.co.uk from Simon Rawlinson. The headline is Simplification, Our Friend AI and Robotics, Finding the Fix for Construction in 2026. And he starts by saying market sentiment took a battering in 2025, and viability remains a huge challenge. So, what are your thoughts on what Simon's saying here?
Well, I don't disagree. I'm not sure it contradicts me. Again, market sentiment, I think he's absolutely right. We've said before, this disconnect between what was happening with the numbers and how people felt about the numbers, I think kind of comes through again.
Yeah.
I will say, but please go and read this. It's such a
Hmm.
fascinating article. As you know, Simon Rawlinson of Arcadis is a fairly regular contributor to building, and all of his stuff's good. I particularly like this one. I think some vindication for some topic, well, some AI related topics that you and I discussed previously. In that, a lot of the things in there, there's kind of there's a grown up approach. The AI isn't this silver bullet, and the AI itself is myriad different applications rather than, I mean, we're probably as guilty of it as anyone, to be fair, Pete, in that we make AI this kind of discrete little thing, and actually the potential applications are absolutely enormous. But I like that Simon takes a very sensible, in my opinion, pragmatic, grown-up approach to this, in that
Hmm.
in many cases, the sector has built in the same way for north of a century, probably, several centuries in some cases. Unlikely that we're going to change that, even with something as potentially seismic as AI. And instead, what's likely to be happen, and I think we've said this before, which is where I speak about vindication, is that what people will try and do is apply this in logical ways to their existing workflows and make those more streamlined and easy to deliver, rather than let's reinvent construction from a blank piece of paper and start thinking again about how we're going to build these assets. It will be incremental gains across the piece. And I think much less scary for people, much more palatable, much more possible, I guess. So I think that's actually doesn't sound as sexy or exciting as brave new thing. But for me, I think that feels much more possible on that basis. I don't know what you make of that.
Yeah, apologies. That's my bad for saying that the sentiment was didn't take a battering. But the one thing that sticks out in this more than anything, yeah, you can talk about robotics and AI, but that is the actual deployment of these things. And he goes into detail about robot dogs and the likes, and I think he mentions Build Dots, which is a huge fan of what they're doing as an organization and what they bring to site. But we're getting closer to that deployment and support functionality of AI starting to deliver on construction sites. But as we've said previously, we're going to need people to be up to speed with these things, not just the manual part of a site, the bricks and the blocks and the pipe work and everything that goes into any type of site, but also the tech that comes with that. That's going to make things easier. It's going to make things hopefully quicker, safer, more manageable. And harping back to last week's episode, where we were talking about a different way of building homes is needed to help with homelessness in the country,
Mm.
he's on a very similar thread here in that if we want to move forward, if we want to grow and develop as an industry, we can't think the same thing is going to work as it did 10, 15 years ago. We need to start thinking slightly differently, bringing new things to the table, bringing new ways to build and construct and project manage different materials and the likes. And I think that you can almost open Pandora's box from that perspective. But these things need to be slowly built into what we do. Yeah, we can test and we should certainly be more innovative, but we need to do that en masse. We need to make sure it works, and then we can start to develop talent. We can start to educate people about these new ways of working and building and using tech on site. And slowly you build momentum, and it doesn't become this new thing. It is the norm, and that's where I think we need to get to.
I completely. Let me drag it back to marketing again, as within the last article. But I think you're 100% right, and I think a lot of this is again, it's taking a grown up approach, and people thinking from a messaging point of view. Where are my audience? Where are they in terms of risk profile, and therefore, what's the easiest way to introduce this? So I remember going to UK Construction Week a couple of years back, and there was one of these robot dog things there, but it was almost like
Mhm.
construction's version of Crufts, where it's just a kind of an open pen for this robo dog thing to kind of run around and do flips and whatever else. And everyone's curious and taking photos and video, but there's no
Mm.
there's no discussion on, practically how might this be useful. And I've seen similar kinds of things with, these kind of on-site robots lifting things, and all very, very impressive. But yeah, you don't look at those and think, well, how does that fit into today's workforce? It all feels very sci-fi.
Yeah.
Again, one of the
Where's the
things
use
in the
case?
it 100%, and I hadn't really considered it, but one of the things that Simon highlights in the article is the use of robots within things like demolition, for example. We can't
Mhm,
get away from the fact that there are still certain roles, particularly on site within our sector, they are just dangerous.
mhm.
There is a reason that it's a sector that I love, but we can't shy away from these things. We are still, I think I'm right in saying we're the sector that has the highest rates of injury and sadly fatality compared to other sectors. Well, it's a high risk environment in a lot of cases. So, what can we be using robots for that reduces that? And that's not to say that, here come the robots to take people's jobs, but what are the specific tasks that are danger laden that we can move people out of the way of? But he mentions demolition, which I thought was, I kick myself for not having thought about it before, but that's what an obvious use case for that kind of technology. And similarly on the AI stuff, and you hit the nail on the head a little bit earlier, but things like data management, records management, people talk about digital twins, but using those in a meaningful sense doesn't really get spoken about all that much. I think people's version of AI at the minute is still ChatGPT, it's still
Yeah.
large language models. It's create this thing for me. I was having a conversation with someone a few weeks back who was saying that we know more in many cases about the secondhand cars that we buy based on their logbook than we do about the buildings that we purchase. If there's any kind of some buildings that are north of a century old, if there's been any kind of deviation from plan, you're very, very fortunate if you've got some sort of record of what's being used and why and all that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, if we can digitize that and give everyone across whether it's new build or whether it's retrofit or just facilities management and ongoing management of, um, if everyone has a single source of truth related to that property, then we're already in a better position than we have been. And it's not, like I say, it's not tomorrow's world. It feels eminently possible. We just have to change the way that we approach this. So yeah, I'll reiterate and say I think it's a fascinating piece. I think anyone that has an interest in this podcast would similarly have an interest in that article. So yeah, please go and read it at your leisure because I think it's worth it.
Yeah. I completely agree. Uh, to that note, let's summarize the episode as ever, with your takeaway, please.
I think my takeaway this week is probably that it's incremental gains. Again,
Mhm.
whether it's looking at these enormous projects and thinking, oh, it's years of delivery. Well, let's break those down and let's own the story as we go. And on AI, on robotics, on taking the sector forward after a tricky couple of years, let's just take things one step at a time and make sure that we're finding sort of meaningful ways to improve things as we go.
Yeah, one step at a time's summarizes the episode really. We started off with massive projects and what that looks like for 2026, and then we kind of scaled it back and said, yeah, these massive projects, but we still need to learn, particularly around rail and investing in the north. So for me, it's all about project management, doing things correctly, looking beyond the headlines, and making sure that there is a plan and there is that way forward that makes sense, it's affordable, and it's actually achievable, and it benefits a lot of the country.
Well, that probably brings that to a close then, Mr. Sumpton. But given that this is episode 99, party hats that they're ready for next week?
Yeah, it's something that sort of slipped my mind, and it just came up on us. Number 100, the century, next week. Thinking, should we do anything for it? I mean, when you get to 100, it's usually you're on local news in a care home. Someone brings you a cake, and then you either have a fag or a sip of booze and say that if you want to live a long and prosperous life, you need a glass of port every day. That's kind of the sentiment that usually happens. Oh, maybe we'll get a letter from the king. Nearly said queen then. God rest her
It'd be,
soul. The
be
king.
be a very different episode.
You think? Or should we just have a glass of port?
That might be the way to go.
Well, join us and you'll find out.
Yeah. See you next week.